we're joined by political analyst Professor Ibbo Mandaza. Good evening, Professor. Thank you very much for joining us on the program. So several commentators have predicted that Frelimo will secure another presidency, extending their rule since independence back in 1975. Just your takes on how the elections have been unfolding in Mozambique.
Well, it's less to do with Frelimo per se than the fact that we have a young man as one of the contenders for presidency, 47-year-old, what we call in our Southern African parlance, the born frees, so to speak. And I think it's a welcome. If he does win, which the consensus here in Maputo is that he's likely to win, then we have a kind of a new dawn for Mozambique, to quote one of my former students who was briefing me about the Chapo's background. So I think hopeful times ahead, hopeful times, very hopeful times, yes.
Now, much has been made of Frelimo fielding such a young candidate in Daniel Chapo, with some saying that liberation movements across the continent can learn from this moment to prioritize generational mix. Has this issue of age been a very important one for the people of Mozambique?
Yes, in fact, it was a surprise. The sense that out of 5 would-be candidates, Chapo was number 5, last on the list. And I think by lobbying on the part of senior politicians, Chapo emerged the successful candidate for presidential elections on behalf of Frelimo. So yes, it was a surprise, but a welcome surprise. And talking to Mozambicans across the country and in Maputo in particular, there is a lot of excitement at the fact that this new generation is now moved in, and that maybe it's a goodbye to the older generation whose record has been very, very, very doubtful, especially the last President Nyusi in particular. There's been talk of not only the insecurity and the war in the Cabo Delgado, but also the talk of corruption and general lack of focus, and also a leadership deficiency, leadership deficit over the years. So Chapo, 47-year-old, as taller than all the leaders physically in the region, and a regional figure in the sense that he's said to have lived in Zimbabwe, possibly South Africa too, and although he comes from the central region of Mozambique, he was a very successful governor in Nambani on the east coast of Mozambique. So he's a young man, not confined to the ethnic orientation of the older generation. He's a truly nationalist and a regionalist, if I may put it, in terms of a man of the southern region. He represents, as one of your commentators said just now, he represents in a very meaningful way the belated arrival of the younger generation leadership circles in the southern African region.
Some are cautioning against perhaps labeling him as the savior of Mozambique, that some would be setting him up for failure if they are to believe too much, that as a Frelimo party member, that he would be somebody that almost defines himself outside of the party, that basically the policies will remain the same and he'll just go on to implement. Maybe there'll be some sort of a distinction, but it cannot be far too different from the presidency of President Nyusi.
Of course not, but it also depends on the kind of team he chooses. And it's not about one person, but it's really about a teamwork. And one expects that he will choose likewise. When you have a young man or woman at the top, they tend to choose from among their own age group. And I think it is a team that emerges that will determine how Mozambique moves ahead in the coming 5 years.
Then on the side,
I feel very optimistic. As one who lived in Mozambique during the war in the 70s, when there was absolutely nothing here. Mozambique, in particular Maputo, had been reduced to to a disaster zone, you know. There was nothing operating at the time, 78 to 80. Now, I'm sorry to say, but Maputo is far ahead of Harare, for example. It's a bustling city with very strong European features, unfortunately, modeled as it is by the Portuguese on Lisbon. But yes, a lot of investment, a lot of cranes around, a lot of construction going on. And more important, you have a youthful population who look well-fed, who look very optimistic about the future. And really a far cry from what Mozambique was 40 years ago. I'm very happy to be here. Yes.
Pardon me for interjecting there, just in the interest of time. What does Frelimo owe its longevity to? Because a number of political parties, liberation movements across the continent have been struggling. This has been said 2024 to be a very critical time for most of these liberation movements beyond the 30 years. Specifically what we saw with the ANC in South Africa and essentially Frelimo as well now. It is essentially 30 years if we are to think of multi-party democracy, because it was in 1990 that they transitioned to a constitution that allowed for multi-party democracy. So from 1994 until now, it would essentially be 30 years. What do they owe their longevity to?
I think it's less to do with Frelimo, as I said earlier on. And indeed, I would say that the liberation movements of Southern Africa have long served their purpose. You know, they're mere platforms now for younger people like Chapo to come in. But in terms of liberation credentials, they've been reduced to zero, as has been the case in Zimbabwe in particular. But even the extent to which the ANC is depleted, discernibly, I think we can say honestly, that there's less to do with the liberation movements or the longevity of such movements as Frelimo than the emergence of a new generation in politics. That for me is more important, yes.
All right, so I suppose now being the issues, or at least leaders that can emerge, that can address the issues that need to be addressed currently in the Southern African region. Thank you very much, Professor, for your time. That's political analyst Professor Ibbo Mandaza speaking to us.